everybody. Welcome to Entre, Comillas. I'm your hostess with mustache, Eileen. Yes, I'm owning that. Anyways, point is, I'm here with a very amazing guest. Her name is Roberta Martinez, and I'm really happy to have you here, Roberta. As you know, I have been after you to be part of this show for the last couple of months. So for you guys to understand, when I first started this podcast, my main mission was to try to find people within my community that really know about Latino history, and I just so happened to the first thing I Googled, Roberta, was Latino history, Pasadena, and you came up.
Oh, there you go.
So I was just okay, I need Roberta. I need her. I don't know how I'm gonna get her, but I'm going to get her. So here we are. Here you are. Thank you so much. It's taking a while for you to get in this seat. So I'm really happy to have you. And just so you guys know, Roberta is pretty much, I feel like you're everything. You're a writer, you're an author, you are a community advocate. You are just, I feel like you're everywhere. You're the founder of the Pasadena Latino Heritage Parade.
One of the founders.
One of the founders.
Yes.
Roberta, you are everything. At least for me in my little bubble of the world, right? So I'm really happy for you to be here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. And I just want to get started by just asking you about your personal journey, because that's really what I wanted you to do when you came down here, is talk a little bit about yourself and what's brought you to this point.
It's a long time, so I'll make the story as short as possible. So let's see. So I grew up, should go back and say that my mom and dad, they married when they were 38 years old, had me at 39, so I was an only child, and that's part of the story. When I was growing up, I heard stories that they shared. So I lived with history all the time because it was what they had done. I heard about what they did during World War II. I heard about what they did during the Depression. I heard about what they did during the 20s. And because my mom was brought up by her grandmother, who was born in 1854, I heard a lot of history as if it were just day to day. It was like I went to the store instead of I went to the store. Well, you know what, we used to use you to take contraband to Pancho Villa. I mean, it was those kinds of stories that I grew up with. And so just having a chance to be surrounded by history all the time, at one point in my life, I was absolutely bored out of my gourd because it was just all these old people telling all these old stories. But then I began to see more and more how the value of the history, the value of what their experiences have been, and how that's set into explaining who we are, what we do, why we ended up doing some of the things that we did.
Yeah. And it's crazy. So I just want to say, I didn't comment on the fact that Roberta said that her grandmother was born in the 1850s, because she's told me before. But let me tell you, when she first told me, it shocked me, because your parents were older when they had
Exactly.
they had you.
Exactly.
So essentially your mom grew up around the Victorian times.
If you think just a few years, 6 years,
yeah,
after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was when my great-grandmother was born.
Yeah.
And so the experiences that she had and that the family had from that time was part of the family lore. And my mother was the family storyteller.
Yeah.
So she kept all of these stories, and she was the sort of precision date, almost, it was a Tuesday at 3 o'clock kind of person when she would tell the stories. So there was a lot of precision in what she was sharing. I don't have that gift. I have to write everything down, and then I have to recheck. But she had it, and because I think she had also been an only child, there was this kind of pleasure she received from sharing her history and sharing the appreciation of all these family stories with whoever was around. Yeah. And I was around a lot, so I heard a lot of the stories.
So you inherited your love of history and storytelling from your mother.
From my mom.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that myself. My grandmother had the gift. I feel like I'm the same as you. I need to write things down, because I feel like everyone who's older, they just understand that how to tell a good story. My grandmother was definitely one of them. I feel like it's because they had no TV. Like,
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think that, and I think it was also a matter that people repeated stories.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that we deal with now, I think, especially with this moment with social media, podcast aside, is sometimes we have so much coming at us. We don't have time to kind of embrace the story. And to sort of absorb the story and see what the essence or what's the main points of the story. What was the meaning? What was the impact on this relative or that relative, thinking along family stories.
Can you tell me what it felt like growing up during those times in history, and how you feel like it kind of has shaped your love for community advocacy and your love for writing about history?
Wow. Okay. So being second gen, it was a matter which is always interesting because we're used to thinking about, especially if folks that are younger are used to thinking about like the different waves.
Yeah.
So somebody your age is first gen, right? Yeah. And so the idea that this 71, this abuelita over here would be a second gen is a wacky thing. But migration moves in waves.
It does.
Right? And so for a lot of us that are born around the time that I was, this was, there was no Univision, there was no Telemundo, there was no radio really in Spanish. So things became very English driven.
Right.
The experience was very one of acculturation to what it meant to be sort of American. Mm-hmm. And having lived through some of those things that I mentioned, the Depression and World War II, it makes sense, historically, why people would be ending up in situations like that. For me, growing up, I grew up in a time where I was in the Girl Scouts and I did tap dancing and all this other stuff. And then when I got to high school, it became more and more evident that there were people that were protesting about the inequalities that were existing in education, the inequalities that were existing for what we think of now as different affinity groups, for folks with disabilities, for folks with different ethnic, racial, linguistic kind of dominance in their lives. And it was a time of questioning a lot of things. I was thinking about this actually as I was driving over. And I think part of what happened was the idea that with a presence, you can make change. Mm-hmm. If you say something, change can happen. Yeah. If you don't say something, change won't happen. And you begin to go into sort of a spiral where you lose the ability and the weight of what you feel and what you want to say and what you value. And so it was during that time that I actually remember I was involved with some youth group that was up in Sacramento. And it was when we were boycotting grapes, right? And they tried to give us grapes that were dyed red so they would look like cherries. And there was a group of...
What?
Yes.
They did that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why?
Oh. Well, because that way they wouldn't be causing any problems. Well, I think there's a lot of layers. That way they wouldn't be showing that they were using grapes.
Yeah.
They thought they could get it past us.
Yeah.
And there may have been some people that were going to do it to us, just kind of show us, well, see what we're doing this to you. And so there was a group of us that got together and we found a mimeograph at wherever hotel we were staying at, and we started to strategize. And this was the sort of thing that was going on in a lot of different groups.
Yeah.
And when I was going to high school, I went to Garfield High School.
Yeah.
And I was there during the walkouts.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the people that were there, like Harry Gamboa and John Ortiz, were busy being very clear and being very bold about saying there are inequities that are taking place in our education and it's not right.
Yeah.
And so the walkouts were a huge impact on me and on the community, and very empowering.
Yeah. And as someone who I've heard of the walkouts, and I feel like during my high school experience, we also had something similar to the walkouts. And it mainly had to do with the fact that they were cutting a lot of positions for teachers around the time when I was going to high school. So I feel like because my school, I went to, my public high school here, John Muir. And I don't know if I've told you before, but I have a friend who is doing a doctoral, and she has a case study going on at John Muir. And one of the fascinating things that she saw at John Muir High School is that it's one of the only schools in Pasadena that has never been fully integrated. So it's very much black and brown, and and it's been like that, and it's been like that for a really long time. And so around the time that I was going to high school, there was a lot of like teachers who were not getting paid enough, or there were a lot of positions that were not being filled, and we didn't even have a science teacher at some point. Like it was a very kind of, I guess, weird time to go to high school. Not as weird as those who, kids that have gone through the pandemic in high school, but because they have a whole other experience themselves.
Oh, there's all kinds of weird.
Yeah, there's all kinds of weird. That was my weird, you guys. So it was definitely, and since we were a public high school, it was very, I guess, the pay wasn't great for our teachers. So it was just a lot. I don't even think they're getting paid well enough now, in my opinion. Either way, we had a walkout, and it was mainly for that, to try to get our teachers to get better pay, and to try to shed some light on the fact that we were losing, a lot of we were losing a worthy education, even if, in our minds we're like, oh, you guys think of us as just public school students whose opinions don't matter. And since we were the bad school, the minority school, it really felt like we were being sidelined. And so this was our way of showing them no, we're not going to take this anymore. Now
presence matters.
Yeah.
I mean, presence matters, and figuring out what really is your message.
Yeah.
And usually it's wonderful to have 3 or 4 different people, say, or 3 or 4 different groups working together, each having a little bit different force or impact.
Yeah, but that was my first really my first experience where I was like, wow, as a student body, we have some say and we have some power, to at least, have our voices heard. And from what I understood, they did do some changes with PUSD, so that was great. But back to all of this, I'm just back to you, being second generation. Was that was that your first exposure to something like that, where you realized us having a voice is important, us advocating for ourselves is kind of this is what it is, this is what it's like?
I think it was more a matter of having grown up when I did.
Yeah.
Not so much, not refocusing from Gen to kind of the time period.
Right.
It's coming off of World War II, it's coming off of the Korean War, it's coming off of a lot of times where people are, where one speaking out is something that's encouraged.
Yeah.
Right? Which is very different from the moment we're living in right now, right? So I think it was kind of transferring and understanding what the meaning was to my particular community.
Right.
But speaking out was something that was something one should do.
Yeah.
We had roads that worked, and we had different things that were supported the community, and that was partially because the community would come out and speak about what they needed.
Yeah.
And it was learning that not all communities are listened to in the same way.
Right.
And how do you respond to that? What do you need to do about the message?
Right.
How do you clarify the message so that people can hear what you want to say? And what is the message that the larger group really does want to share that will be most meaningful to all of them?
Back to sort of the beginning when I was researching, like I said, you have a book out there. It's called Latinos of Pasadena. Latinos in Pasadena.
In Pasadena.
For me, it's a significant work, especially growing up Latino in Pasadena. It was really cool to have a book that showed me that we've had roots here. At least my community has had roots here.
Definitely.
And, as someone who came from a family that immigrated and, a family that doesn't really go out into the community, I think I've told you that before. Like they were never very engaged. They're still not very engaged. I feel like they're learning, but they're not quite there yet.
When you're working hard, you have a lot on your plate.
You do.
Literally.
You do.
Literally.
You do.
Because you're going out and you're doing especially at working class immigrant folk.
Exactly.
You're there, you have one, maybe two jobs, and if you have extended family that you're involved with, you have to figure out how the household is going to function. You have to make sure whether or not you're going to have that roof, that rent, what happens when the landlord raises the rent again, what happens if there's some kind of choque that takes place and you have to cover that with your car, and your car is getting you to work and they've changed the bus line. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And then to navigate that in kind of like a language you don't fully understand either, it's hard. It's really hard. But it was important for me to know of your work for that reason, because I just didn't, prior to that, it's kind of like you live in a community and you're kind of just there. Your parents don't really know much about it. Your family doesn't really. All you know is that you're living here now and we're making it by. And you're figuring things out as you go. And it's not like I had parents who went to school here or like knew how to navigate the system really.
Well, you know what? I had the benefit, and here's one of those points I think that maybe is kind of interesting and definitely part of my story. Is that so I went to Garfield. Orgullo, all of this stuff. When I grew up, the phrase was Mexican American.
Right.
Very proud of being an American with Mexican roots, and then very much a Chicana. And then coming here and living here for 15 years and not knowing that Latinos had ever been here because there wasn't a presence.
Exactly.
There wasn't a visible presence.
Exactly.
There was nothing in the books. There was nothing that was being shared. And in fact, I asked a couple of people, as I was becoming more involved in the city eventually, I would talk about, well, where is there recognition that Latinos were ever here? And they would say, well, the architecture is Spanish architecture.
Okay, California was run by Spaniards. It was owned by Spain at some point, and Mexico.
Well, and it's an architectural style. It's not the people.
It's not the people.
And so for 15 years here, I had no idea Latinos had ever been involved here.
Honestly, I think the first time I was ever exposed to the fact, there has been Latinos here. There's the missions. Like, we were taught about the missions in elementary school. Okay, but at least living here in Pasadena, it's very, how do I put it? Pasadena is known for being very, not to say it like this, but it's very white. Pasadena, everywhere you go, it's a very
the perception
affluent,
outside of the city of people that don't live here is that it's people who are white and predominantly people who are white, people who are well-to-do.
Our affluent, old money kind of thing. At least that's always been the perception. Even when I would go to university, I've had friends who are also Latino and they're like, they live, in other parts of LA, and they're like, oh, well, where's your city? And I'm like, Pasadena. I'm like, oh, okay. And they dismiss you a little bit.
Yes. Or it would be one of those, what? Really?
They do.
There are Latinos in Pasadena. I mean, literally, that is the response. And there were business owners that were here, and one of the persons that I always try to include is Doña Eulalia Perez Guillen de Martinez. Right? So she was a phenomenal woman who could be a whole kind of other podcast about her. But the short of it to this story is that here was a woman who was a widow who worked at the mission, and when the lands were given from the church, they had to become secularized. She was the person for whom Rancho El Rincón de San Pascual was reserved.
Oh, wow.
And all of Pasadena sits on what was her rancho.
No way.
It was all, it went over along the arroyo to the west side, and it went about a mile up into the mountains, part of San Marino. I mean, it was a huge this is where I'm not good with numbers, but I think it was something like 14,000 acres or something like that.
I did not know. You see, every time I'm with Roberta teaches me something new. This is why she's here, okay?
Well, and this is why history matters, because
Yes.
it shouldn't be something that you have to have like on a quiz.
Yeah.
It should be just sort of, I used to say that, if we were in Iowa,
Yeah.
somewhere or the other, there would be a plaque that recognized the first people that were here in Iowa. Or
Yeah.
these were, several things that are positive
Yeah.
that took place here. And our history is not to be found except on, I think, one plaque that's in Villa Park.
Really?
Yeah, for Cantos Robles.
And that's literally the
Robledo,
only
Cantos Robledo,
and that's the only shout out?
that I know.
Wow.
That I know of. There's also one that's on the east side of town, which is where one of the two Mexican schools was.
Wow. Okay. Wait, so you've told me about okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves. You see, there's always so much that Roberta teaches me that I want to jump around everywhere. But like my question for her book was, because I was about to start asking the question, was so as we know, Latinos in Pasadena, it is a significant work. And it kind of brings to light the lesser known stories, like you said, like you've just said, right? So like what inspired you to embark on this journey of uncovering the hidden legacies of Latinos and Mexican Americans in this region here in Pasadena? Like what inspired you to do it, I guess?
So I had been here. I was beginning to active a little bit and began to meet some of the elders that had been here.
Yeah.
So people who would be elders to me still, even at my age now.
Yeah.
And they would share some of their stories, and you could find it nowhere.
Yeah.
It was nowhere, and I had no idea about kind of the sequence of what the community experienced. I knew what my mother had experienced in Pueblo, Colorado.
Right.
I knew some of what my mom's family experienced in El Paso. I even knew what some of the folks what happened to my familia in Chihuahua. But I had no idea what was going on here. And so it was an opportunity to kind of pull together some of these stories that gave concrete personal histories, concrete personal experiences of what took place here. And so having the opportunity, beginning to talk with one person, and they would say, oh, and then there was such and such, and then you go and talk to such and such, and they would have another aspect or another element of the story, or reinforce what that first person told you that made it real and not just their imagination, or their experience, their interpreted experience of history. So it was a matter of just getting all of these stories and not seeing them at any of the historical exhibits that would go on, and knowing that people's stories were here and not being shared. And I remember I was with a friend at the time at an exhibit and said, here it goes again. It's like everybody in the Southwest was twiddling their thumbs waiting for folks from Indiana to come here.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the impetus for my feeling like I needed to write the story.
What were some of the stories that stood out to you when you were researching all of it?
Oh, wow. Oh, so many stories. Stories like Doña Eulalia, somebody who is really, really, as a feminist, she's very, very powerful in a lot of what she did. She's also somebody who is talking about a personal experience in a historical context.
Yeah.
I had to know about the missions too. I made the little shoebox diorama, all that. And all of a sudden, here's this person whose oral history people can read online.
Wow.
In English or in Spanish.
Wait, she had the opportunity to say
Wow. It's a longer story, but Bancroft actually was busy sending people out to get oral histories, what we would refer to as oral histories of people. And so she was one of the folks that was interviewed. And so it's mis recuerdos, or un recuerdo de una vieja. I don't forget what the title is exactly. But you can read it online.
I will try to find it because I want to hear this as well.
Yeah. So you can see. So here are all of these stories, and it was just compelling to figure out, okay, what opportunity do I have now that I've now that I've learned this, and one of the things in thinking back about, the impact of the walkouts and the impact of all the Chicano movement for me was what you have, you share.
Yeah.
And if you don't share it, it dies, right? It's a little bit like watering a plant.
Yeah.
If you don't water it by sharing, it's going to die and it's going to wither away. And it would be also a matter that I would see people that would tell me stories, and they loved the opportunity because nobody had ever asked.
Yeah.
They didn't feel like they were a part, an integral part of the city.
Yeah.
And sharing what had happened to them, what their experiences were, good, bad, and just kind of Tuesday morning, made a huge difference to them. And they would then also want to bring other people to have them get a chance to share their stories and their shared stories.
And like you saying that, that's one of like the big reasons I also decided to do this, is because I've known people within my community who have these amazing stories, just absolutely unbelievable stories. And I'm just like, why aren't you sharing these? Why aren't there like people coming to you to, ask you about these things? Because their stuff is and these are everyday people that you see just walking around the city. And I'm just like, wow, this stuff is extraordinary. Even my own family has such amazing stories, but like they've never felt like they love sharing it, but they're not the type that are just like right away kind of, it's hard for them to kind of like be open, or
we're used to. I mean,
right.
it goes to one of those things, especially within our community. I mean, we've had to deal with the U.S.-Mexican War during the 19th century.
Right.
We dealt with the deportations and repatriations.
Right.
I mean, there were abuelitas that were wandering around into the 50s that once they returned, they kept their naturalization papers in their purses. And the reason they did that was because they had gone through that frightening period where they were taken away and they didn't know whether or not that could happen again. Yeah. It's also a matter that our stories are not visible. And if one's stories are not seen, they're apparently not valued.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is that kind of thing that we feel. It's almost in a family, you would think about the middle child. That if you don't say anything, you just kind of can slide through and do whatever, But you're also, it's also complicated because then you don't feel like anybody really wants to hear your story. So why should you share your story? Right. What value could there be of it?
Can you talk about a particular story? I mean, you've already kind of mentioned it, but has there ever been kind of like an individual, particularly that comes to your mind, that kind of like, you're like, wow, like, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to really, really find this person and share their story within my book? Is there any that you kind of want to give a shout out to besides the one that you've already mentioned?
Oh my gosh, there are so many, and that's the hard thing in an interview like this. Is or a conversation like this, whatever, however you want to call it. There are so many stories, right? All of which have value, all of which have impact. I would say, thinking about Marianne Martinez and thinking about Manny Contreras, who were two of the founders of the Pasadena Mexican American History Association, which were people who lived in this community and grew up here in that period where we didn't have any history. Getting a chance to share their stories and getting a chance for them to have input about what other stories, other people's stories might be included, so that I could get a sense of what this community was. I think one of the benefits that I had coming into doing what I do here is that I'm an outsider. I'm coming from East LA. Right. So it took a little while before people decided I was okay, because I'm not from Pasadena, right? But once I was sort of accepted and they began to tell stories, they knew that I really valued them. And I didn't have any families or schools. You didn't have to worry whether I went to Muir or Blair
You were
or PHS.
no. So so like that, talking about that. So why Pasadena for you, by the way? Like, why Pasadena in particularly?
The short story was two quick ones. One of them is that when I was little, I had a doctor that used to work at the jail that was here that I used to come to see. So I'm used to coming up the 110 from East LA. That was part of it. And the other part of it is that I had older parents, and I knew that they were going to have to come and live with us at some point.
Right.
And Pasadena's not that far from East LA. And at the time when we first moved here, it was about 15 minutes away. So it was close enough, but not too close.
You're like, there was a healthy distance there.
That's a healthy distance. Yeah. And then they lived with us for several years. Yeah.
So your parents and that doctor at the Pasadena
the doctor
jail.
at the jail. I mean, I had started seeing him back when I was in East LA, and my folks liked the care that he gave me, and so here we would come, and so it kind of felt like home. And to get beyond that, it was also a matter that I loved the diversity that I saw in the block where we eventually decided to buy our home.
Right.
You name a group, and it was on the block.
Right.
You named an orientation for family members, and it was on the block.
Right.
And I loved that about Pasadena.
Right.
And I think if there's one thing that I've learned that's been reinforced by some of the research that I've done is that diversity has always been here.
Right.
We some of the first people that came here were abolitionists and suffragists. There were people that were here that were arrogant Mexicanos, Californianos that were here. I mean, it runs the gamut, and it's always been here.
Yeah. Beyond your writing and historical research, you're known for your active engagement around the community. So how did your roles as a historian and a community advocate kind of merge, and how did they influence your contributions, you think?
In 2 words or less, right?
In 2 words or less. In 2 words or less, if you'd like.
Parade in Jamaica. Let me just kind of leave it at that. I think it was through a lot of the things that I've been involved with. I've had the good fortune that people that were there would listen to me, because coming up during the walkouts, I felt pretty free to express what I'd concern, but also not to do so in a way where I'm going to smack somebody across the face verbally, because people tend to not listen to you when you do that. I am blunt, but it's not harsh. And so I think part of what happened was that I began to be involved in different organizations. And through the Parade in Jamaica that I mentioned, and through other things that I was doing involved in the school district and in the city, people would share their thoughts. Yeah. And so I had an opportunity to share what they had told me. I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, I feel like it does, but going into that, is that kind of where it started, where you were became one of the co-founders for the Latino
History Parade.
Latino History Parade, sorry.
Actually it was because, as I told you the other day, sometime, it was way back when, I love things Irish, and I went to the Irish Parade. Yeah. And because we used to have we still have Doodah, but we had the Rose, and we had the Rosebud, and we had all of these different parades that were here, including...
Pasadena is a parade city.
It is a parade city. It is kind of phenomenal that way. And because I appreciate tradition and ritual, it makes sense.
It does make sense.
It really kind of helps to yes, we embrace this. Yeah. Whatever this may be, right? And so I was at the Irish Parade, and I saw who was there for the Irish Parade, and I didn't see anything that was happening with Latino heritage or Latino history, because I knew we had the Black History Parade. And so I thought, well, why don't we start a parade? Yeah. And there were folks like Manny and the Pamaha group that they loved this idea. They love this idea of sharing their history. Manny was one of the folks that was very instructive to me and to a lot of other people because what he had done is he had these large phone cores, and he would have photos of the community that he had been able to essentially Xerox. And he would put those images up, and the elders would come and they would look at these and they'd talk about whatever their experience was. And it was wonderfully moving to see how touched they were by being able to do that. And for me as a teacher, because I've been a teacher really most of my life in a variety of ways, was seeing the lessons that were being shared, or seeing the abuelitas, or seeing the uncle or the cousins that would come and say, oh, look, remember when we used to do that? And then you'd get this whole history that would make it alive again.
Yeah.
It made it alive for them, and it made it alive for other people. And so that whole idea of presence is one of those things that being involved with the parade in Jamaica. Jamaica actually was what we called it because that was what my elders would call their celebration. And so to honor them, that was why we called it a Jamaica.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And still in different areas in East LA, in Colorado, as I mentioned, a sort of gatherings, like what we might call a fiesta or a festival or kermés, depending on where you're from, is a Jamaica.
I didn't know that. I mean, for me, it's like, of course, like we call it desfile, like the obvious words, like, but Jamaica I always associated with the drink. So I find that really cool. I didn't know that was like a different word for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of those things that I enjoyed about we were able to do, because we had a lot of educators that became involved.
Yeah.
Sometimes the school district was more involved. Sometimes the city eventually became more involved. But it was a matter of just looking at some of this opportunity for looking at regional differences.
Yeah.
It was important to us to for the parade in Jamaica to have the history of the folks who had been here before, the folks who had experienced, like my mom and dad. They were here during the times of the deportations. For folks that were living in Mexico, they don't know what the deportations don't necessarily mean anything to them, because that was not their historical experience, right? So it was a matter of sharing the history that had been happening here, and also looking for opportunities for those elders who had no idea what it was like to truly be fearful of la migra. For them to understand the experience of another segment of our community.
Right.
So having people having opportunities to learn about each other is a positive thing.
And now that you say that, you're right. Like, because everybody kind of, at least within our community, everybody kind of came within different waves, right? Any immigrant community, really. But
any migrant community, because people coming from Indiana over here, this ain't Indiana.
Exactly. It's definitely a culture shock. Where if you pull out your roots and you go somewhere, it's a culture shock. From any place you go, wherever you come from.
Absolutely.
And let alone another country, right? Where it's a completely different language.
Another government, another religious.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, I mean, I love that having the parade and having the Jamaica, you just saying that, it does bring up those conversations, and it has maybe someone who is just migrating somewhere, talking to someone who's been there for maybe 3 generations, 4 generations already, and understanding that, wow, this is what I can learn from this person, and this what I can,
or just knowing that it happened to them.
Exactly.
I mean, it's one of those things that, when you're learning about somebody, and there are those things that you learn that you don't know, and then you can maybe kind of absorb it a little bit, and then maybe if you interact with them again, then you can have a conversation about it, and then you can talk about your particular experiences. And in those particular experiences, especially the more specific they are, the more universal they are. What is it like to be new? What is it like to have to learn what the cultural context is? What is it like to have cultural collateral? What does it mean that a perfect example of that, I think, for using our own family, is the very first January that we were here. Our comadre from Riverside, which is where we've been living, came in to visit us. And so December 31st, we decided, well, let's go out to dinner.
Right.
So we went down Lake and then made a ride on Colorado Boulevard. And we couldn't figure out why was there all this traffic. It was New Year's Eve in Pasadena. What did we know, right?
Oh my God. Yeah, no. You were not going to move from there for a good couple of minutes.
It was a long time till we got to dinner. I'll just put it that way.
There's no way. But like it's also interesting because like sometimes I look at some of my friends who are like third generations, right? And I'm like, wow, like one day I'm gonna have kids, and their experience is gonna probably be, their experience is probably gonna be similar to my friend's experience. And like sometimes I like think about it that way, and I kind of find it really cool. Like I'm just like, wow, like we're kind of each other's mirror histories, right? Like it's just like maybe when she sees me, she's all like, oh, I'm seeing my grandmother's experience. Yep. And I mean, not completely, but to a certain extent, like there's that, right?
There is that essence of what their experience is,
right?
Going to a new place or being in a place a long time or wanting to get out of a place. Yeah. I mean, just all of those things. Yeah.
Latinos in Pasadena also brought a lot of hidden histories to light. But looking ahead, how do you believe that the work ultimately contributed to empowerment and the understanding of present and future generations?
That actually is something I think other people need to answer,
right.
Quite frankly. I think what it avails itself
right.
to help to do is to learn about what came before.
Right.
And it's that every affinity, going back to affinity group, every affinity group says, essentially there's some saying that says you need to know where you came from in order to go
know where you're going.
Yeah. And I think that is what anybody's history or anybody's writings about their experience can help groups do. You learn, so it's not the first time this has happened. It's not just you. There are people that became more empowered because of X, Y, and Z. So X, Y, and Z don't feel right for me, but A, B, and C might.
Right.
Will this work?
Right.
How do I become integrated? How do I become integrated into the community and the flow of the community without losing my sense of identity?
Right.
That's, those are sort of the questions, I think, more than figuring out like a blueprint about how to go about doing it. And I think it's empowering. Actually, you kind of leaned on that idea a little bit earlier. It's empowering to know that we've been here.
Yeah.
It's empowering to know that there have been other people who were role models. It's empowering to know that there is resilience that has been a part of our community, and that it's an onward moving journey that we're always going through. It's never done.
Yeah.
It's never done. And there is never a time where we get rid of all of the problems.
Yeah, there's not.
There isn't.
Because there's always going to be new ones coming up,
There always is. And actually that in itself is a little bit like, I'm thinking about, when you're getting ready to, if you're playing football,
yeah,
or you're getting ready to dance, or you're getting ready to run, or whatever, you bend your knees and you kind of gather yourself together before you move forward. Yeah. And I think that's what knowing something of history can provide.
I agree.
You kind of gather yourself together, and you know what's happened before, and so you know what might be, whatever your variation might be in your time and your place and your need or your identity, how you might move forward in the situation.
On that note, in your opinion, are there anything that you've seen, in you researching history, that problems that you saw through your research that maybe are still happening now, or that you feel like it's kind of like a recycled issue?
I would say just that the biggest thing is that we don't have visibility in the city.
Yeah.
We still don't.
Yeah. And that has not changed. I agree with that. I agree.
They're really, I mean, compared to a lot of the cities around us, there isn't visibility.
Yeah.
Going to and talking to Muir,
right.
or talking about Muir rather. As far as I know, there isn't anything approaching a mural that speaks of the Latino, Latinx, Latine, lo que sea, experience in this town.
Yeah.
And that has been a majority Latino school.
Yeah.
for decades.
Yeah.
So in some ways, there aren't changes.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is to think about it, but there are opportunities for change.
Yeah, there are.
There are opportunities for change, and it's very easy to just kind of sit and grouse and say, well, why did they, or how come they're not, or whatever. Well, turn that around, use that same energy and say, okay, so how do we make this happen?
Yeah.
How do we get other people to become our allies and see the merit and the value and the shared experiences that we had?
You know, one thing that always kind of makes me think, like, it kind of trips me out, I guess, is my phrase of saying it. I've talked about this with my other guests as well, is that I've always found it super surprising that with California, LA County, Pasadena being a majority, I mean, it has a lot of Latinos here. We have a large Latino community within LA County, any place in LA, be it Pasadena, East Los Angeles, wherever, right? We have a huge Latino population here. And I've always found it so crazy that we're, like, the Latino community is very, I guess for me the word is hush hush. It's very to themselves. It's very much like tu acá, yo acá. Like, kind of like, it's very, I don't know, it's almost like we kind of mind our business, or like we try not to get too involved in things. And I've always wondered if it's because of that, if it's because maybe we don't know a lot about our own history here, or if, you know, like, whatever the case may be, is it the fear that maybe some of them, you know, the fear of deportation or of their families, something happening to them. I don't know, but I've always found that very strange.
Well, I think there are a lot of stories that could speak to that. One of them is I remember being involved with a campaign.
Right.
And there were folks that decided that they would not go and leave, you know, how people will knock on the door and they leave the thing and all that. And they decided they weren't going to do that with the Spanish-speaking registered voters.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need them to be elected.
Yeah.
Well, you do that to a community often enough, and they're not going to be involved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they're not valued.
Yeah.
You don't see yourself, you feel like you're not valued.
Yeah.
You know? I think that speaks to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's really funny because Eunices Hernandez, who was my guest for my second episode, I asked her the same question. I'm like, so what, you know, like you got this spot and you really didn't expect it. She had to, like, knock on 67,000 doors for her to win against her opponent. 16,000 out of those 67,000 people came out to vote for her, and majority of them, I think, were Latino. So it's just like, it's always like kind of trips me up. It's just like, there is power where in our community. I feel like it takes a lot to get us out there.
It takes a lot, and it takes people who are allies.
Right.
Because any group that's been successful has typically had allies that are not specific to that group itself.
Right.
Because we look at, it helps to find kind of what is our common goal.
Right.
What are the common issues? How does interaction with this particular community, whatever it might be, make our city stronger, make our school district stronger, whatever. Yeah, when I ran for school district board in 2008 or 2000, must have been 2009, it was a matter of, we had to go to all of Pasadena, all of Sierra Madre, and all of Altadena in order to get votes. That was a lot of doors that we knocked on.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, but it was very cool.
I let Roberta go. I do have one last question. And Roberta, you let me know. So you've received numerous, I feel, honors and awards for all of your hard work, and my God, you've worked hard. Let me tell you, I feel like you have. I feel like you've done so much. And I, to keep going. So could you share a particularly meaningful recognition that you feel affirmed the impact of your own work and your own, like, all the stuff that you've done? Has there ever been kind of like that award that you're like, yeah, like, yeah, like, I deserve this. This is a good award.
Well, I don't know about the I deserve part.
I feel like you deserved it,
well,
Roberta.
There we go.
feel like you deserved it.
Well, I think it's a matter. It's more a matter. I'm going to kind of scooch around that. I think it's more a matter of it's rewarding to see people having an understanding of their history.
Yeah.
And being able to share it. So a simple, totally different situation. I used to teach preschool.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we would do was, we would study different places around the world because I love all kinds of culture. Culture is just such a, I love it so. And so we would do the Japanese bird song, chi chi papa, chi papa, susumerega konosente wa furufuruchi papa. And the reward that came to me off of that was not being able to teach it to the kids, but later on at the end of the year, having them correct each other and sing it so that it really became theirs. So anytime I'm in a situation where history has been shared, an interaction has taken place, or somebody has spoken out and said, yes, I know about this.
Yeah.
And then they share it, and maybe they share it with a third person there. That is where the real reward lies for me. To see that, to see the pride that the elders would have when they would come in and see what we were exhibiting, or to see them finally have their stories recognized publicly. That's the reward. That's the reward.
Oh. I love that. I want to also give my thanks to you, because I feel like you're that person for me that really, I have a deep love for history and I have a deep love for culture, and I feel in that way we're the same. And I'm very happy to have you here in person with me and sharing these things with me and sharing these things with the people who watch this, because I feel like it's incredibly important. And there's so much more. I know that there's so much more, Roberta, because I feel like every time I have had the opportunity and the absolute pleasure of talking to you, you enlighten me over and over and over again, no matter what. And I know that we've talked about you coming on future shows, and I'm so excited for that. I'm so excited because
we'll have fun.
Because yes. And I can't wait for that, because I feel like there's so many things that so people can learn from you and learn from just like what you know. I'm definitely one of those people. I know that there's people out there, people hearing, and I'm just so grateful to have had you come in today and for you to have shared your time. And overall, that's my gratitude to you, Roberta. That's where we're ending it, okay? All the love. Okay, well, that's where I'm gonna be. I'm just saying that now. Yeah, so that's it for today's show. Feel free to catch us on our all social platforms, all of which will be linked. And thank you guys so much for being part of today's show and listening in. Goodbye.